One of the big talking points was transfers. And one of the biggest talking points was one thing that happened pretty much instantaneously after we pressed upload on the previous video, and that is Noni Madueke. Now, it seems like he could potentially be on his way out of Chelsea. Dan and I have been discussing his name for a very long time, and it seems like he's going to be a casualty of the players that are coming in. Dan, 50, 60 million quid, Arsenal look in. How do you feel about that?
I still think it is a risk to let him go. I think objectively, the numbers show that he was Chelsea's best wide player last season. And that's not me saying he's the greatest winger of all time. That's not me saying you can't upgrade on him. But he is someone that I think, based on the eye test as well, not just based on stats, I think improved last season. I think added new dimensions to his game. And in a tight Premier League where you have arguably up to 7 teams competing for 4 or 5 spots for the Champions League. And given Chelsea were only 5 points, I think it was, in the final Premier League table off of Arsenal, even if Noni Madueke would go in there to be a rotational option to Bukayo Saka, he potentially adds, another dimension to them. However, that doesn't mean it has to be a bad sale because, you look at the players we have already. I think Pedro Neto has gone up another level in this tournament. So hopefully that maintains, into the new season and he can increase his productivity, which he needs to. Esteval, we're still unsure. We did a big segment about him in the last show. We're unsure how he does, but, hopefully some positivity. Joao Pedro, Jamie Gittins, Liam Delap, Cole Palmer, Enzo Fernandez. You add names like overall in the attack, they can make up for whatever is lost by Noni Madueke. I would say, though, my kind of sticking point for this is that Chelsea have to be getting over about 55 million for me. Anthony Elanga has now gone to Newcastle for that fee. I know it isn't the exact fee he potentially goes for, but when you hear that Alejandro Garnacho apparently is being priced at around 60 million by Manchester United, other names that's kind of gone off my mind at the moment, but there are other examples, and even I guess arguably you'd go Mohamed Kudus, right? Linked with Chelsea, but mainly Spurs at the moment. That's why Chelsea are well within their rights to ask for that kind of fee. And also, of course, what Chelsea have just paid for Jamie Gittins. So logically, Madueke, England international, start of a top 4 Premier League team, given his output, he needs to be going for anywhere close to 60 million for me.
I agree.
Given Chelsea extracted 65 million for Kai Havertz, who they're already trying to replace, you've got to try and extract as much out of them as possible. So I think Chelsea playing hardball on it is completely understandable. The player, without going into too much detail, I mean, I'm a fan of the player himself in terms of what he does on the pitch. I think there has always been, I think, a talent in there. I just, from a first few times watching him at Chelsea, maybe it's just an aesthetic personal preference for me. I think he's an impactful footballer. I think he's someone that in an age of wingers that at times frustratingly play the percentages and recycle possession, I think he has a bit more of that maverick in him. I think he's someone that wants to take a shot, wants to cut in, wants to make something happen. And if it at times frustrates people, which means that Madueke has this he has a wider kind of scale of performance at times where a Pedro Neto may look better because, and I think he has looked better in the Club World Cup, but he doesn't have wild moments where he's swinging the ball and it's going way over the crossbar and people are frustrated, or he's, making a pass an audacious pass that doesn't work out. His all-round game is a bit more tidy and people don't really notice that. Madueke kind of will do audacious things that sometimes doesn't work out. But I have to say, instinctively, I'd always prefer that player than the one who's more safe, just as a wide player. Because I think that Madueke's work rate off the ball is not terrible as well. But I understand maybe that there are some justifications for selling him, looking at some numbers and I think he only increased, I did a piece on my Substack about this, he only increased his Premier League goal tally under Maresca compared to Pochettino by 3. So it wasn't like a massive jump up in terms of exponentially great. And I think the argument, the two justifications I think for selling Noni Madueke is the players you've already got getting better, the players you're bringing in are going to replace him, and the fee you're getting for him is good enough and big enough that you could either invest it back in for someone potentially better,
Hmm.
or just, it's kind of too good to pass up. And if the player himself is kind of open to moving, and maybe Maresca has already kind of made his mind up that Pedro Neto is my first choice, then, maybe that's where a compromise is found. I still, I think it is a risk. It's just Chelsea, I think, have got to make it not a risk, in the sense of either buying someone else or just the players we have prove him kind of an irrelevancy in terms of the next 9 to 12 to 18 months. That's the hope, right? Is that, Cole Palmer came in and very quickly made us forget about Kai Havertz.
Hmm.
He was, Cole Palmer is the player we thought Kai Havertz was going to be. That's why Kai Havertz, despite scoring against Chelsea and may score against Chelsea again, I have no regrets about that player leaving. I don't think you find a single Chelsea fan. I've not met a single Chelsea fan. We have discussions about players who maybe shouldn't have left, right? I have not met a single Chelsea fan who's told me they are upset and kind of regretful about Kai Havertz leaving.
No, no,
So that, I think, tells you everything you need
yeah.
to know about how that has worked out. And that will hopefully be the scenario that plays out. That's what I hope the scenario plays out with Noni Madueke. I don't want to be sat here. I never want to be sat here regretful of a player leaving.
No, no, I agree. I agree. I think with Noni, my issue is, as much as he's been impactful, and I agree with everything you've said, I think he picks and chooses his moments, and I think up here there's something going on, because he has his cycle for me, which was, you see this player that's really impactful, takes people on, really makes a difference. He does that for 2 or 3 games, disappears for 2 or 3 months. Chelsea were down in the dumps, tries to hype up the crowds, he still thinks he's the main man. Hasn't done it for a while. Everyone gets tired of it. He realizes he scores another goal. So, okay, well, to have that consistency of someone who could take people on, like, we have been spoiled by watching Eden Hazard for such a long time. I'm not going to sit here and say that Chelsea fans are there's a certain expectation, and obviously I don't think any winger is going to come close to Hazard for a very long time. But like you've said, taking people on rather than playing the percentages, he does that well, but he just wasn't doing it enough. And for me, I think that there'd be times when Chelsea would need a player to support on that right hand side or on that left hand side if he was playing there, and that defensive work rate and working for the team. I just don't think he did it enough. And it would often be left wanting. You see him strolling around when realistically the only player with any credit in the bank to even consider doing that is Cole Palmer. Like you've said, he made us forget about Kai Havertz because of how amazing he is, right? Noni Madueke is not Cole Palmer. And I do think that sometimes mentally, and you look at how he played on the pitch, just the eye test and watching him, I'm like, there's just something in his head where it's just not quite right. And for me, I just think, look, like, I agree with you. If £55 million is tabled, I'm happy with that, because that's 55 million quid that can go towards Mohamed Kudus, or at least a portion of it. And I think, is Kudus an upgrade? Yeah, he's a massive upgrade. And he's a player with a lot of experience and a lot of quality for those big games that Chelsea can be playing. And I think that, that utility option of left, right, down the middle if we need it, that player which, with that 3-4-3 and the attack we're talking about, coming inside, yeah, I like the look of that. So I think for me, it's a massive upgrade should it happen. If it doesn't, and Chelsea don't make the difference and we sell him 55 million and we regret it, because I think realistically he is going to go on and do better things, because as much as I'm criticising him for his mentality, he's still very young. I do think that he'll mature and he will get better. Whether or not he'll do that at Arsenal remains to be seen. I feel like, I have a funny feeling that if he does go to Arsenal, it might be a stopgap. He strikes me as a Nottingham Forest, West Ham player, not an Arsenal player.
People point this out that from a player point of view, logically, it doesn't make a lot of sense.
No.
Because unless he is being viewed by Arteta as a left winger, which would make a bit more sense, he's going to be the understudy for Bukayo Saka. That's the deal. You are the understudy for Bukayo Saka. Now, Bukayo Saka went out and was injured for quite a big period of last season. So maybe that happens again. I mean, I fearful from an England perspective that Saka's being run into the ground, and I fear he may be another Mason Mount waiting to happen, where injuries catch up with him because he's been played a ridiculous number of times. I actually think for his own career, Madueke would fit far better with Eddie Howe at Newcastle. I think that would be a team also that plays transitional football a bit more. I think him and Isak potentially would be quite a devastating partnership, whether he's playing off the left or the right. So I think from it's Arsenal, right, and it is a big club, and obviously they want to take the next step to win the Premier League title. And it's London too. Obviously, that's always going to be a big selling point, as it is for players coming to Chelsea. But I just, from a career progression point of view, like Madueke, I'd still bet he would gain more consistent minutes at Chelsea, staying at Chelsea, than he does going to Arsenal.
Yeah.
Because what you're relying on at Arsenal is the first choice goes down injured. At Chelsea, maybe he isn't viewed as the first choice, but I think has proven himself capable of getting first team minutes consistently. I think it's much more of he can prove himself to get that chance. I don't think there's not a Cole Palmer in his position, in the sense that this is the first choice. He's going to play all the time. It's not a Moises Caicedo. He's going to play all the time. So I don't really understand that from his, because surely at this point in his career, he wants to become the star man. And I don't think Saka's still young in the prime of his career. That's not a guy that's going away unless he gets sold by Arsenal in a year's time. Maybe then he's playing the long game there, or he has to adapt to play on the other side, and that's how he gains more minutes. Maybe that's a potential, and maybe that's what's being looked at. But I just purely from if I was to advise Noni Madueke, and I'm not even saying biased Chelsea point of view. I'm not even saying you have to stay at Chelsea. I'm like, isn't there another location you go to where you become an instant first teamer and you become the guy you probably want to be, and to get that platform?
Forest.
Yeah, Forest.
That's the only place, really.
Forest. Arguably Newcastle too, because Anthony Gordon plays off the left, right?
So there's they've just signed a Langer as well. I mean,
Forest. I'm not entirely sure. If you look at the moves, it's not like Forest have really, because they didn't get Champions League football, they're not exactly making the sort of moves. I mean, arguably, I don't really know. Aston Villa doesn't really suit him because Villa play inside forwards. They don't play as natural wide players as Maresca does. So yeah, it's a complicated one, but just my instinct right now, I think the deal gets done. I think it does get done.
Yeah, I agree.
I think it gets done. My hope is that Chelsea just don't bow down, and because the personal terms have been agreed already, we have to take a lower fee. No, you don't. You've been fleeced enough. You've got to. And Chelsea, to be fair to Chelsea, compared to this ownership, previous ownership, Chelsea are good sellers. They're able to extract good fees for their players, and hopefully that'll be the case here.
Well, yeah, which is exactly what I'm thinking. So it'll be interesting to see what happens with Noni Madueke. And as the Club World Cup does draw to a close, it does mean that silly season can well and truly ensue. So transfer news will be rife on this channel and on the podcast platform as well. But we should move on. Speaking of Nottingham Forest and looking at players, and Chelsea obviously looking to replace Noni Madueke, according to sources, Nottingham Forest are interested in Malik Fofana, who is a target for Chelsea and Bayern Munich as well. Now, Dan, I don't know a lot about this lad, but given the position that Lyon are in currently, and him being on their books and then potentially being stripped of any serious status in French and European football, is it somebody that Chelsea should consider having a punt on, and would it be an upgrade on Noni Madueke?
Potentially in the long term. I know Oli Glanville is a big fan of him, as are others. Statistically, in terms of him in Ligue 1, I know Tifo have done really good work on this. I looked at some of the numbers on a show I did a few weeks back when we were kind of heavily linked to him. I think when Ornstein reported about it. So I definitely suggest people go and watch that. It's potentially, you got to factor in as well. Malik Fofana is a left. He plays off the left more so. That's where he'd be coming in, and we've just signed Jamie Gittins. So, we're not sure what's going on with Tyreek George. Is Tyreek George going to remain for the season? We know João Pedro can potentially play on that side as well. So I'm not entirely sure it makes as much sense as if you sell Noni Madueke, signing, say, Mohamed Kudus, who is more of a ready-made kind of, he's going to walk into the first team, or at least he's going to be instantly competing for minutes. I mean, maybe Malik Fofana does, but that financial side of it, yeah, I think it's kind of up in the air, isn't it? I think generally, whether it's Fofana, whether it's Kudos, and actually it's not just attacking players. I think if Madueke goes, I'm very intrigued to see what Chelsea do next. Because as we said on the last podcast, and I think it's good to transition this onto the final part, right, where we speak about, I still think, with the exception of one other position, I still think the non-negotiable for the rest of this window, Chelsea have to sign a new goalkeeper.
Agreed.
And I do kind of ponder, that money for Madueke might not go to another right winger. It might go in another position. And I don't think any of us would really moan. Really, like, if I said to you right now, Madueke goes out the door, we don't sign another attacking player, because they look at the options and they think, actually, that's in terms of bodies, that's enough depth and cover. And instead, what they do is what they should have they should have done it before the Club World Cup. And we call AC Milan's bluff about the deal being off, and we go and sign Mike Magnon.